This hearing is resumed.
I might have to rely on some aversion therapy here. Administered in accordance with the rules, of course. Pavlov's dogs.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The next witnesses are Mike Ferris, Victor Boyd and Bruce Gibson, who are members of the Citizens Commission of Human Rights. They're represented today by Moira Green, and I'll allow her to introduce them. Oh my God.
Now, I'm making a very brief opening. Now, the Royal Commission is now going to hear from the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, or CCHR, to use the abbreviated title. The witnesses are Mr. Bruce Gibson, Mr. Victor Boyd, and Mr. Mike Ferris. And they will talk about their personal experiences about events regarding Lake Alice and the Lake Alice survivors from the period 1976 until the present day. You will hear about their meetings with child patients at Lake Alice and their support of survivors throughout the decades from the 70s to today. You will hear about their persistent efforts and their work through the various legal processes and institutions throughout the decades, culminating in their submissions to the United Nations. And you'll hear first from Mr. Bruce Gibson.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Before we do that, I'll just welcome you three gentlemen, and I take it each of you is going to speak, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so on that basis I'll get you, and I don't know if you were in the hearing the other day when I asked two gentlemen to do it and they thought they were getting married. So I don't want you to be under any illusions about this. I'm just asking if each of you would follow the affirmation. Do each of you solemnly, sincerely, truly declare and affirm that the evidence that you'll give before this commission will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yep. Now, if you each say your names so we know which is which is Mr. Gibson?
I'm Bruce Gibson.
You're Bruce Gibson, and that means?
I'm Victor Boyd.
Mr. Boyd and?
Mike Ferris.
Mike Ferris. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Gibson, if you can tell the Commission your full name and occupation.
Certainly. Bruce Robert Gibson, and I've been a religious counsellor for 50 years. I retired from my life's profession in the last 5 years. Physical health issues contributed to this. I still work now in food safety for a food company on a reduced schedule.
And do you have your witness statement dated 27 April 2021 in front of you?
I do.
And if I can just lead you through your statement. Can you please tell the Commission what your role was with the Citizens Commission on Human Rights and its establishment in New Zealand?
Certainly.
That's paragraph 1 on from your statement.
All right. First of all, internationally, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights International was established in 1969 by the Church of Scientology and Professor of Psychiatry Thomas Sars to investigate and expose psychiatric violations of human rights. The New Zealand branch of CCHR was established in 1975 and incorporated in 1976. I oversaw its establishment in my role as the Public Affairs Officer of the Church of Scientology of New Zealand. Once the group was established, the first question that really arose was, well, how do we go about this? And it seemed the best thing was, well, we go and we look and we see. and we find out what exactly was happening. Sometime later, we had the good fortune of meeting Thomas Sars, who was at that time the professor of psychiatry at the upstate University of New York, Syracuse, and he was quite a staggering figure, very Lincoln-like. He wasn't anti-anything, but he was for human rights.
And if I can take you to paragraph 5 of your statement, can you tell the Commission about your understanding of electroconvulsive treatment and how it was used in Lake Alice?
Certainly. So in my statement, I've used electric shock treatment and electroconvulsive treatment in several places instead of the abbreviation ECT. This is because ECT, in a way, acts as a euphemism and disguises the ferocity of the procedure and the pain that is caused without anaesthetic, which was used consistently on the children at Lake Alice.
Can you please tell the Commission about CCHR's first visit to Lake Alice Hospital and your impressions that day at paragraph 7 of your statement?
Certainly. Our first tour was in January 1976, and I was part of the team from CCHR who conducted the tour of Lake Alice Hospital. We didn't know what to expect. There were 5 members from CCHR who were part of the tour of Lake Alice, and there was a journalist present from the Wanganui Chronicle and a photographer. And we met with the superintendent, Dr Pugmire, and he appeared wary of us and a bit defensive. Initially, it seemed he was uncertain whether he would even allow us in. He was having second thoughts. But finally, he gave in to reason and he allowed the tour to proceed, and we walked into the hospital area. Now, I still remember that very well 45 years later. It was grey, it was gloomy, it was very bare. It was lacking in coziness or comfort, very institutional, impersonal, a bleak world. I felt by the end of the tour there was an overriding atmosphere of helplessness in this place. We were taken to the children's unit initially, and there was a weariness from the child patients towards us. They didn't know who we were or what we were doing there. As the tour progressed, the word got around that we were there to help the patients and that we were not part of the psychiatric or social welfare system.
Please tell the Commission about the children that you saw at the Lake Alice unit and their approaches to your group. Paragraph
Certainly.
15.
On more than one occasion, CCHR members were pulled to one side by a child patient and spoken to in private. This was how we received unsolicited complaints of abuse. A boy told one member that if they misbehaved, they were sometimes locked in a room of their own. One boy said he was locked up for some days. Another child complained he was being given injections as punishment. More than one of them said they hated the injections as they were painful and it made their legs so sore they could hardly walk.
And what did the children say about electric shock treatment to you?
2 boys called a member into a room as they appeared not to want any of the staff to overhear them. They told her that some of the children were given shock treatment as a form of punishment to make them toe the line. 2 days a week, they said, were set aside for shock treatment. The children hated and dreaded receiving electric shock treatment.
Turning to paragraph 20, what did the superintendent, Pugmire, tell you about the running of the children's villa?
He didn't want too much to do with it. The superintendent told CCHR that the running of the children's villa was left to the child psychiatrist, Dr Selwyn Leeks, to do what he thought fit. It was here that Dr Pugmire absolved himself of any acts or treatments in the children's unit, distancing himself from them.
What were your impressions from this first initial visit to the children's unit? And I'll just ask that a document be put overhead. It's 483002. Now, no, that's not it. Sorry, 483002. While that's happening, what were your initial impressions when you visited the unit?
Well, we knew at that time of the first visit that what we were hearing was wrong, although we didn't know the full extent of what Dr Leeks and some of the staff were doing to the children in Lake Alice. It felt like we'd stumbled upon a very serious issue. Children being subjected to electric shocks and drugs as punishment. And we put out our report.
And that report is your 1976 interim report on tours of Kingseat, Tokanui and Lake Alice. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If we could see page 19 on the overhead. Oh, is that? Okay. Oh, is it?
Can I comment on this report?
Yes, do.
Yeah. So we conducted a tour of three. It was Tokanui and Kingseat, as well as Lake Alice. And this is set out in quite some detail in this report here. Our concerns were published in the Whanganui Chronicle 2 days later. And following the publishing of our interim report, there was further media coverage about children being given shock treatment at Lake Alice. It was from these beginnings that the Lake Alice Child and Adolescent Unit was brought to the attention of the New Zealand public for the first time. CCHR raised the issue of human rights abuse in Lake Alice, Kingseat and Tokanui. But we were also interested in what other abuses might be occurring in various psychiatric hospitals around the country. So we brought these issues into public eye to raise awareness and to hopefully bring about change. The story of Lake Alice and abuse of children made headlines, and this was when the medical reporter of the New Zealand Herald, Peter Trickett, took an interest and started writing articles. He personally cared about and was energetic in the pursuit of truth. He extensively interviewed CCHR and senior medical staff. He visited Lake Alice and spoke with several children and reported his findings in a long article. I spent an entire day with Peter. He interviewed me and worked on the article. The result was the abuse of the children at Lake Alice through shock treatment used as punishment.
Mr. Gibson, can I just stop you?
Sure, certainly.
It's being typed up. Everything you're saying is being typed up. Okay. But our superhuman steno, it's getting late in the day. If you could just be a bit wary, and also our signers are having to follow too. It's hard when you're reading not to go fast, but if you could just remember that. Thank you.
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Mr. Gibson, if I can take you to paragraph 36
Yes.
of your statement. Now, CCHR took part in the magistrate's inquiry into the case of the Nguyen boy. Can you tell us about your involvement? And I refer you to paragraph 36 of your statement.
Certainly. CCHR was concerned with two major matters at the magistrate's inquiry. One, the authority by which ECT was administered to the boy by medical authorities at Lake Alice Hospital, and any assorted matters that may be thought relevant to the general objects of the inquiry.
And if I can refer you to paragraph 41 of your statement, where you talk to the inquiry about the children that had spoken to you. Can you read that out?
Certainly. Part of our submission to the inquiry included the fact that a number of the children had spoken to members of CCHR when they toured the unit. The CCH chairman on the tour, the late Tony Wilson, the civil engineer, reported the following. During the tour of the children's section, the group spoke freely with the boys who were around the ages of 10 to 15 years. Upon my assurance that I was there to help them and to improve their conditions, they overcame their initial suspicions and hostility. This was upon me agreeing not to identify them with their statements, for they were fearful of punishment. This is what was said. The electroconvulsive therapy, shock treatment, was used as a threatened punishment and given for unruly behaviour and disobedience. ECT was given to quieten them, that they had an intense fear of ECT. One boy stated he had been given 4 days solitary confinement for running away, and this was verified by the other boys. Those who had been given drug injections as punishment stated the injections were very painful. In summary, CCHR's point of view was that electric shock was barbaric and should never be given without consent to anyone, least of all children, and especially children who were in the care of the state, who had had all their rights removed.
And how did the magistrate regard the issue of electroconvulsive treatment at the inquiry? And I refer you to paragraph 43 of your statement.
The magistrate made sure the subject of electric shock treatment was outside the scope of the inquiry, as we and others had made it known that we wanted a wide-ranging inquiry into the treatment. Instead, the magistrate considered that electric shock treatment was warranted when he made the following statement, which I do not think he was qualified to make. The statement was this: there can be no doubt that the boy's condition when he entered Lake Ellis Hospital in November 1975 called for ECT.
And now if I'll just take you to paragraph 54 of your statement. How did the magistrate view CCHR's involvement in the case?
The magistrate considered it significant that CCHR visited the hospital in January 1976, and how the children who talked to CCHR members gave them some ammunition to fire at the hospital. He did not accept the allegation that ECT was used as punishment for unruly behaviour and considered that the fear of it was exaggerated. I think we've seen the opposite during this hearing. Part of this reasoning was that the boy in question was more afraid of injections.
Can you tell the Commission about the magistrate's findings in this case, especially concerning CCHR and Accord's involvement? And that's at paragraph 62 of your statement.
The inquiry magistrate dismissed all aspects of CCHR's and Accord's concerns regarding the treatment of the Niuean boy. In addition, Judge Mitchell considered the tour of Lake Ellis by CCHR in January 1976, and the subsequent media coverage was what triggered the Niuean boy to complain about the electroconvulsive treatment. And up until then, the boy did not have a problem with the treatment he was getting, he said. It was with this viewpoint in mind that the magistrate made no recommendations for change at the Lake Ellis Children's Unit, but rather chose to point out, and to discourage it even, the protests from people with no direct interest in the case about the administration of ECT without express authority from the family will no doubt make doctors hesitant in future, and people who would rather entrust these decisions to their doctors, but find the doctors unwilling to take that responsibility. However, in fairness, the magistrate did say whether that's progress or a step backwards is a matter on which there may be different opinions. As it turned out, the magistrate was correct in his prediction, for after the media exposure on the subject of electroconvulsive treatment being used on children, the number of treatments used in New Zealand dropped dramatically from around 7,000 in 1976 to 5,000 in 1977.
If we can just put up the overhead 83004. Now, an article appeared in the Listener, and that will be on the screen there, and it was entitled electroshock treatment in New Zealand, a special report, and it's dated 6 May 1978. Do you remember when that article came out?
Yes.
Is there anything you want to comment about in that article?
Well, the injustice of the whole thing on shock treatment on children was the injustice of it. There appeared enough information at the magisterial inquiry which built up to it, and enough evidence also with articles such as this to warrant further examination of the harmfulness and the pain caused by electric shock treatment, which needed inquiry, it needed looking into. Well, we're here 45 years later and we're still looking at it, and this is a long road in which we're really hoping for major, major change. Because furthermore, we believe at that time there should have been a recommendation for this wider investigation, especially as it implied punishment was being used and no consent with children.
All right, we're going to move on now to the Ombudsman inquiry and some aspects of this inquiry at paragraph 69 of your statement. That was an inquiry by the Ombudsman, Sir Guy Powles. Can you tell the Commission about your memory of that?
Certainly. In 1977, the Ombudsman, Sir Guy Powles, conducted his own inquiry following a complaint from the parents of a child who'd been admitted into Lake Alice. His investigation went a lot further and looked into the issues of the detention and treatment of the boy, and once again the lack of his and his parents' concern to treatment. Compared with the magistrate's inquiry, the Ombudsman was much more critical of the boy's detention and treatment with electroconvulsive treatment.
If I can just refer you to paragraph 7 of your statement, tell us about some of the key points of the Ombudsman inquiry from your point of view.
Well, the Ombudsman was considered the consent was a fundamental legal right, which was very important from our perspective. And the consent should be informed, otherwise psychiatric treatment such as ECT would constitute an assault. And he clarified and made it very clear. He said it's a fundamental principle of our law that a person who is capable of consenting must have a reasonable opportunity to acquiesce to any extraneous application of force. Otherwise, the act would constitute an assault. In the context of medical and psychiatric treatment, it is well established that if the consent and corroboration of the patient is where possible a condition and is upon the administration of treatment. The Ombudsman further recommended that the Department of Health review the use of ECT. With regard to the reservations I expressed about the way ECT was administered to the boy, I suggested that the Department of Health undertake a review of the administration of ECT in institutions under its responsibility in the light of the following observations. And the Ombudsman went on to say, the use of unmodified ECT as a mode of treatment for children and young persons detained in psychiatric hospitals under the Mental Health Act should be discontinued. 2, the use of ECT treatment on children and young persons in psychiatric hospitals should be discouraged in all but exceptional circumstances and where the principles of consent have been met fully. 3, consideration should be given to instituting legislative change to give effect to 1 and 2. These findings were heartening to us when they came out. CCHR saw the issue of electroconvulsive treatment. being given to children is something that needed to be looked into by a formal inquiry, especially when given without any consent.
And just to confirm, the date of that report was April 1977, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, if I can just bring up an overhead, which is 006. Can you tell the Commission about what was happening there? And it's at paragraph 76 of your statement.
Just looking at it, I see how much I've aged. Okay. All right. So a protest was held then on the 16th of April 1977. This was 2 weeks after the release of the Ombudsman's report. CCHR staged a protest against the continued use of electroconvulsive treatment on children. Among the people who took part were members of the Auckland Committee on Racism and Discrimination and people from the Women's Party, Women's Rights Party in the Values Party. And here I would like to acknowledge tremendous work over all these years by Accord. Fantastic. Oliver Sutherland and his group have done fantastic work. We were calling for a Royal Commission on the use of ECT on children, saying it was savage and cruel and that it should be banned. And it was a reported protest at hospital, Whanganui Herald, of that date.
And if I just take you to follow the sequence of events, so paragraph 79 of your statement, which is 6 days after the protest, can you tell us what happened
Yes.
then?
Yeah. 6 days after the protest, Dr John Dobson, chairman of the New Zealand Committee of the Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, who had been made aware of the protest, did nothing. At no time did Dr Dobson or the College of Psychiatrists investigate Dr Leeks or ask for an investigation into Dr Leeks' practice and methods of treatment of the children at Lake Alice. At no time. Yes.
Tell us about the meeting held with Dr Mirims, the then Director of Mental Health, and that's at paragraph 81 of your statement.
Right. On the 9th of August 1977, Harry de Jong and Margaret Boyd of CCHR met with Dr Mirims, the Director General of Mental Health, to tell him that a full inquiry into Lake Alice was needed. Dr Mirims was not prepared to order an inquiry, but he did say there was going to be a conference of psychiatrists and the Lake Alice affair would be discussed there. He did say that unmodified ECT would not be used anymore.
So tell the Commission, in your conclusion, what happened as a result of CCHR's initial activities regarding Lake Alice?
Well, we'd been campaigning that the practice of ECT being used on children and young people at Lake Alice and in all psychiatric institutions should stop. We did want a full investigation done of the use of ECT in New Zealand psychiatric hospitals, but despite not getting this, we did make a considerable impact on this abusive form of psychiatric practice. What did occur was the superintendent of Lake Alice Hospital, Dr Sydney Pogmire, removed the ECT machine from the child and adolescent unit after consulting with Mirims, then Director of the Department of Health, Division of Mental Health. And it's to be noted that the 1977 amendment to the Children's and Young Persons Act included a clause requiring consent before a child or young person can be given psychiatric treatment. I refer to the Children and Young Persons Amendment Act 1977.
And to conclude your statement, please tell us your views, as you stated at paragraph 88, to this Commission about your views at that point in time.
Very happily. We knew that the issue of human rights in mental health and psychiatry had been firmly established through our actions and the actions of Accord and others concerning Lake Alice. the subject of abuse in mental health system would not now go away. And so it has proved.
Thank you.
I-
Thank you for your statement. Did the commissioners wish to ask questions of each witness?
We haven't discussed that. I'll just confer. Do you want to go to the end? Yes.
I'm happy to wait till the end.
We're all happy to wait till the end. We're dying to get on to the next exciting instalment.
Sure. Okay. I just wanted to say I had the honour of helping establish CCHR at that time. We all knew that this campaign to bring about human rights in mental health had only just begun. What we didn't know was that CCHR would still be fighting for the victim survivors for nearly 50 years to come. And in this is the unknown heroes who, over this period of time, through each of the groups, had their members working. The man on my right, 45 years of research.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
And thank you for what, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your attention and care. You have the power to create a safer future for some of the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you.